On December 14th, 2024, man, 22, gets 10-year sentence for killing motorcyclist while high on ketamine, driving on wrong side of road. Welcome back to my channel. Safety is a fragile thing. It is often invisible. We only truly feel its weight when the world shifts beneath our feet. Tonight, we find ourselves in the town of Horwich, a quiet corner of the borough of Bolton in England, where the damp air of mid-December hangs heavy over the streets and the mist rolls down from the West Pennine moors to settle in the valleys. I know many of you come here to find a moment of peace, a way to quiet the mind before you drift off into sleep. Before we begin our journey tonight, I invite you to leave a comment letting me know where you are listening from. It helps to know that we are not alone in these quiet hours, and it is a comfort to see how far these stories travel as the world goes still. Take a moment now to adjust your surroundings. Ensure your blankets are tucked in, the lights are dimmed, and the noise of the waking world is held at bay. You are in a safe space here. I am your companion in the dark, and together we will walk through a story that is both heavy with sorrow and illuminated by a family's enduring love. The town of Horwich is a place of deep roots and industrial echoes. It is a town where the red brick of the old locomotive works still stands as a testament to a busier time. But on a Saturday night in late 2024, the pace was much slower. The streets were slick with the persistent drizzle that characterizes a northern English winter. On Chorley Old Road, the streetlights cast long, amber reflections onto the wet asphalt, creating a shimmering path that stretched into the darkness. It was December 14th. For most people in the town, it was a night of preparation for the coming holidays. There were television screens glowing behind drawn curtains and the distant, muffled hum of traffic from the nearby motorway. It was a mundane evening, filled with the small, comforting rituals of home. But within this normalcy, a tragedy was unfolding that would eventually lead us to a courtroom in Bolton and a sentence of 10 years for a single mindless decision. We tell this story tonight not to dwell on the darkness, but to honor the memory of a young man named Spencer. He was 22 years old, a son, a brother, and a friend. He was a young man who did everything right. In a world that often moves too fast, Spencer was known for his caution and his respect for the life he was building. He was a safe rider, a person who understood that the road is a shared space requiring vigilance and care. The outcome of this story is already written in the ledgers of the law, and I share it with you now so that your mind may rest without the burden of suspense. Spencer's life was taken by a driver who chose to ignore the boundaries of safety. A man who was found to be nearly 10 times over the legal limit for a dissociative drug. The driver, Cormac Sale, would eventually receive a decade-long prison sentence. But for the family left behind, the justice served in a courtroom is only a small part of a much larger journey toward healing. As we sit here in the safety of the present, let us look back at the texture of that night in Horwich. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that makes you pull your coat a little tighter and seek the warmth of a hearth. The West Pennine moors loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against a bruised purple sky. There is a specific kind of silence that settles over a town like Horwich on a damp winter night. It is a heavy silence, dampened by the moisture in the air and the quietude of the residential rows. It is a place where families have lived for generations, where the geography of the streets is etched into the memories of those who walk them. Chorley Old Road is a main artery of the town, a winding path that connects the residential areas to the heart of the borough. On this night, it was a stage for an event that would shatter the peace of a household already grappling with the weight of recent loss. Spencer was a young man who carried a quiet light. His smile was a constant, even though he was shy by nature. He was the youngest of his family, the one who brought a specific kind of thoughtfulness to the home he shared with his father and his brother. To understand the depth of this story, we must recognize that the peace of this family was already fragile. Only months before that December night, Spencer's mother had passed away. The three men, the father and his two sons, were navigating the early stages of a profound grief, leaning on one another in the way that only those who have shared a life can. They were a unit of three, finding their way forward through the silence of a house that felt too large without the presence of the woman who had been its heart. This context makes the events of December 14th all the more poignant. It was a family trying to stay safe, trying to protect what they had left. The emotional beat of this beginning is one of protection. As your narrator, I am here to guide you through the shadows of this narrative and back into the light of resolution. We will examine the facts with a clinical detachment when necessary, and we will dwell on the humanity of the victims with a gentle respect. The restoration of a family's voice is a powerful thing. For a long time after the accident, that voice was silenced by shock and sorrow. But in the courtroom, and in the statements they shared with the world, they found the strength to speak Spencer's name and to demand that his life be remembered for how he lived, rather than just how he died. He was a safe rider lost, but the truth of his life remains a steady beacon. As the rain continues to fall in our imagination, reflecting the damp streets of Horwich, let yourself sink deeper into your rest. The story is moving forward, but you are stationary and secure. We are traveling back to 7 o'clock on that Saturday evening, to a final hug and a father's simple request for his son to stay safe. It is a request we have all made at some point, a prayer whispered into the air as a loved one steps out the door. In the quiet hours of this night, we will explore the fragility of that safety and the strength required to rebuild a life when it is broken. The town of Horwich is still, the streetlights are glowing, and we are moving toward the heartbeat of a family that loved a young man with everything they had. Good night for now, as we begin the deep dive into the life of Spencer Rothwell-Poole. To understand the weight of what was lost, we must first walk through the streets of Horwich. This town, nestled within the borough of Bolton, carries the quiet dignity of a place built on industry and community. It is a landscape defined by the rise and fall of the West Pennine Moors, where the high ground of Rivington Pike watches over the rooftops like a silent guardian. In the winter, the moors take on a bruised purple hue as the sun sets early, casting long shadows across the terraced houses and the winding ribbons of Chorley Old Road. The architecture here is a tapestry of dark brick and weathered stone, holding the memories of generations who worked the locomotive works and the cotton mills that once drove the heart of the region. The history of Horwich is etched into the very stones of its buildings. You can see it in the sturdy Victorian terraces that line the side streets. Homes built for the families of the men who crafted the steam engines that once traversed the globe. These houses stand in neat, rhythmic rows, their chimneys pointing toward the gray sky like an industrial forest. The brickwork is often a deep, soot-stained red, a testament to the decades of coal smoke that once filled the valley. But on this night in December, the smoke is gone, replaced by the clean, sharp scent of winter air and the faint aroma of wood smoke from a few remaining hearths. Chorley Old Road itself serves as a vital artery for the town, a long stretch of tarmac that curves and dips with the natural contour of the land. It is a road that has seen the transition from horse-drawn carriages to the modern hum of rubber on wet pavement. As you move along this thoroughfare, you notice the variety of the homes. There are grander, detached houses with low stone walls and small front gardens that, in mid-December, are tucked away for the season. The rose bushes are pruned back to thorny skeletons, and the hydrangea heads are brown and brittle, rattling slightly in the breeze. The gardens are silent, waiting for the spring, their soil dark and saturated from the seasonal rains. The streetlights along Chorley Old Road are spaced with a comforting regularity. They cast a pale sodium vapor glow that turns the wet asphalt into a shimmering river of gold. When the night is still, you can hear the rhythmic clicking of the pedestrian crossings, a sound that feels magnified in the quiet hours. The shops that line parts of the road are shuttered for the evening, their metal grates reflecting the passing lights. A small convenience store might still have a warm glow emanating from its windows, a lone beacon for those seeking a late-night pint of milk or a newspaper. On the evening of December 14th, 2024, the air held that specific heavy dampness that settles into the bones of northern England during the final weeks of the year. A fine mist clung to the hills, blurring the edges of the street lamps and turning their glow into soft amber orbs. The pavement was slick with a recent rain, reflecting the red and white lights of the occasional car as it hummed toward home. It was a Saturday night, a time when the rhythm of the town slows down to a gentle domestic pulse. Behind the drawn curtains of the houses lining the residential streets, the blue light of television screens flickered, and the sound of muffled laughter or the evening news drifted occasionally into the damp air. The distant, low-frequency thrum of the M61 motorway provided a constant background noise, a reminder of the world moving elsewhere while Horwich settled into its weekend rest. For the families living here, there is a profound sense of safety in the familiar. You know the sound of your neighbor's gate clicking shut, the specific way the wind whistles through the eaves during a December chill, and the reliable sequence of the traffic lights changing at the junction. The town feels enclosed by the moors, a valley of light protected by the dark, rising land on either side. Rivington Pike stands as the highest point of the local horizon, a landmark that every resident of Horwich knows by heart. On a clear day, you can see for miles, but on a night like this, the Pike is a dark mass against a darker sky. It is a place of ancient paths and stone towers, where the wind always seems to blow a little harder. The people of Horwich look to the Pike to judge the weather, watching as the clouds gather around its summit. On this Saturday, the clouds were low and heavy, promising more rain before the dawn. As we settle into this setting, we can feel the texture of the night. It is a texture of wool coats and damp scarves, of heaters humming in hallways, and the sound of tires splashing through small puddles. The world of Horwich is one of routine and quiet resilience. It is a place where people look out for one another, where a wave across the street is a common courtesy, and where the safety of the neighborhood is taken as a given. It was into this predictable, peaceful environment that Spencer Rothwell-Poole prepared for his evening, unaware that the quiet geography of his hometown was about to be intersected by a force that disregarded every boundary of the waking world. Safety is a quiet, shared promise. It lives in the small details. We trust that the roads we share are governed by mutual respect and clear minds. Tonight, we travel to the town of Horwich in the borough of Bolton, where the damp December air of 2024 clings to the pavement of Chorley Old Road, and the orange glow of streetlights reflects off the wet asphalt. I know that many of you are listening tonight as you prepare to drift off, seeking a moment of stillness after a long and perhaps taxing day. Before the weight of sleep takes hold, I invite you to share where you are tuning in from, letting us know the quiet corner of the world where you find yourself tonight. It is a small way to connect in these late hours, a reminder that even in the stillness, we are part of a larger, silent community. As we settle in, please make yourself comfortable, adjust your blankets, and let the tension leave your shoulders. The story we explore tonight is one of profound loss, but it is also a story of deep, enduring love. We speak the name of Spencer Rothwell-Poole, not for the sake of tragedy, but to honor the memory of a young man who lived his life with meticulous care. Spencer was a safe rider, a person who followed the rules and respected the journey. Yet his life was cut short by a single, mindless decision made by a driver high on ketamine. While the driver now serves a sentence of over 10 years, the story is truly about the family left behind and the voice they found in the wake of silence. As your guide through this narrative, my role is to hold this space for you, keeping you safe as we look back at the events of that winter evening. The justice system has finished its work, the path has been documented, and the truth has been revealed. You can rest now, knowing that the chaos has passed, and only the memory remains to be honored. Let the rhythm of my voice carry you toward the rest you deserve, while we remember a son and a brother who did everything right. The town of Horwich sits nestled against the lower slopes of the West Pennine Moors, a place where the industrial character of the past has softened into the residential quiet of the present. For generations, these streets in the borough of Bolton have been defined by their red brick terraces and the steady, reliable nature of the families who call them home. To the north, the landmark of Rivington Pike stands as a silent guardian, watching over the valley and the winding roads that connect the community to the wider world. There is a deep sense of permanence here, an architectural history that speaks of locomotive works and textile mills, now replaced by the peaceful hum of a modern suburbia. On the evening of December 14th, 2024, that natural stillness was accompanied by the damp, penetrating chill of a northwest winter. The air was heavy with the scent of wet pavement and the faint, earthy aroma of the moors. as a low mist began to cling to the higher elevations of Chorley Old Road. It was the kind of night where the streetlights cast long, shimmering reflections across the asphalt, turning the mundane commute into a series of amber-lit corridors. The temperature had dropped just enough to make the indoors feel like a sanctuary, while outside, the occasional passing car created a rhythmic, splashing sound that faded into the distance. I wonder if you can picture the way the mist moves across those hills, blurring the lines between the earth and the sky. In the quiet hours of a Saturday, time seems to stretch, allowing the weight of the week to finally lift. Inside the homes lining the street, the weekend routine was in full effect, providing a soft backdrop of normalcy to the neighborhood. Blue light from television screens flickered behind drawn curtains, casting dancing shadows against the glass as families settled in for the night. In some kitchens, the kettle was likely whistling for a final cup of tea, while in others, the low murmur of conversation drifted through open doorways. From a distance, the constant low-frequency hum of the M61 motorway acted as a reminder of the world's movement. Yet here in the heart of Horwich, the feeling was one of profound peace. It was a time for winding down, for reflecting on the days gone by, and for enjoying the simple, unhurried presence of those who shared the roof. This was the world Spencer knew, a place of predictable comforts and familiar turns, where the horizon was always framed by the hills he called home. He was a part of this landscape, a young man whose life was woven into the very fabric of these quiet, mist-covered streets. 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening usually carries a specific kind of weight in a family home. It is the hour when the day's chores have finally settled and the long stretch of the night begins to take shape. On December 14th, the air inside the house was warm, providing a sharp contrast to the damp chill that had settled over the Bolton landscape outside. Spencer was preparing to head out, moving with the quiet efficiency that defined his character. He reached for his heavy winter riding jacket, the fabric rustling softly in the hallway. His father watched him, a routine sight that had repeated itself hundreds of times before. There was no sense of foreboding, no sudden chill in the room to signal that the world was about to tilt on its axis. Instead, there was only the familiar, grounded love of a parent for a child who had already seen too much grief in a single year. They stood near the door for a brief moment, a space where so many hellos and goodbyes had been exchanged over the years. The father stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his youngest son. It was a firm, lingering hug, the kind that conveys everything words sometimes fail to capture. The texture of the jacket was cool against his palms, but the warmth of the gesture was absolute. As they pulled apart, the father looked at Spencer and spoke the words that were both a blessing and a habit. He told him that he loved him. He told him to stay safe. These were the anchors of their relationship, the simple verbal contracts they made every time one of them left the house. Spencer offered that characteristic smile, the one that reached his eyes even when he was being quiet, and stepped out into the night. The front door clicked shut with a solid final sound that echoed briefly in the hallway. Outside, the motorbike engine turned over, a rhythmic mechanical hum that Spencer had maintained with such meticulous care. The sound did not roar. It purred, a testament to his respect for the machine and the neighbors. From the window, the father might have seen the glow of the tail light, a small red ember burning against the deep indigo of the December evening. It moved slowly down the driveway and then merged with the shadows of the street, fading until it was nothing more than a memory of light. Returning to the living room, the father settled back into his chair. The house was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the residual energy of a life being lived. He expected the rhythm of the night to follow its usual course. He expected the sound of that same engine to return in a few hours, signaling that his boy was home and the world was right. There was a cup of tea, perhaps, or the low murmur of the television to fill the gaps in the air. He sat in the peace of his home, unaware that the safety he had just wished for his son was already being compromised miles away. He rested in the innocence of that final hug, a moment of pure connection that would soon become the most precious and painful memory of his life. Spencer was 22 years old, a young man who carried himself with a quiet, unassuming grace that seemed to settle the room around him. He was shy by nature, the kind of person who preferred the comfort of a small circle over the noise of a crowd. Yet his presence was never heavy. Those who knew him best often spoke of his thoughtfulness, the way he would anticipate a need before it was voiced, or offer a hand without being asked. But the thing everyone remembered most was his smile. It was a constant, gentle light that reached his eyes even when he wasn't saying a word, a silent assurance that everything was okay. This quiet strength was perhaps most evident in the bond he shared with his older brother. They were more than siblings. They were the kind of friends who didn't need to fill the silence with talk to understand one another. In a world that can often feel loud and unpredictable, they were each other's confidants and steady ground. His brother saw in Spencer a person of immense potential, a soul that was just beginning to find its rhythm in the adult world. They shared their dreams and their struggles in equal measure, building a foundation of trust that made the walls of their home feel like a safe space. Outside of his family, Spencer's greatest passion was found on two wheels, but he was not the thrill seeker one might expect of a young man with a motorbike. He was an amazingly safe and careful rider, a man who respected the machine and the road in equal measure. He did everything by the book, from the way he wore his safety gear to the meticulous care he took in maintaining his bike. In the garage, the air would often smell of oil and cleaning rags as he checked his tires and polished the chrome until it reflected the overhead light like a mirror. For Spencer, riding wasn't about speed. It was about the discipline of the journey. He believed that if you took care of the road would take care of you. He was a careful soul who moved through the quiet hours with a deep sense of responsibility. When he put on his helmet and clicked the strap into place, he was honoring the promise he made to those who loved him. To Spencer, being safe was a form of kindness, a way to ensure that the smile his father loved so much would always find its way back home. He rode with the weight of that love, unaware that the rules he followed so closely were about to be tested by someone who followed none. The house on the quiet street in Horwich held a silence that was relatively new, a hollow space where a mother's voice had once been the melody of their daily lives. Only months before that December night, the family had been forced to say a final goodbye to the woman who anchored them, leaving Spencer, his older brother, and their father to navigate a world that felt suddenly fragile. Grief has a way of slowing time down, turning the simple act of waking up into a quiet victory. And for the three men left behind, the walls of their home became a sanctuary where they protected one another from the sharpness of their shared loss. They were a unit forged in the furnace of recent tragedy, finding a rhythm in the mundane tasks of survival, like the steam rising from a kettle or the sound of a door closing softly at the end of a long day. In the kitchen, where her presence had once been most vibrant, the three men gathered for meals that were often eaten in a comfortable, respectful silence, a testament to the fact that they no longer needed words to understand the depth of each other's pain. In the wake of his wife's passing, Spencer's father found himself watching his sons with a new kind of intensity, a protective gaze that sought to shield them from any further hurt. Their household was a place of few words, but deep understanding, where a shared glance across the dinner table carried more weight than a long conversation. They moved through the rooms with a practiced gentleness, each taking on small roles to fill the void, whether it was preparing a meal or simply sitting in the same room while the television hummed in the background. There was a profound, quiet strength in the way they stood together, three men bound by blood and a mutual promise to keep moving forward, even when the path ahead seemed clouded by the mist that often rolled down from the West Pennine moors. The father, carrying the dual weight of his own mourning and the responsibility of anchoring his sons, saw in Spencer a particular kind of vulnerability that he felt compelled to guard, unaware that the greatest threat was not the grief they shared, but a moment of recklessness waiting on a damp road just a few miles away. Spencer was the youngest, the boy of the family even at 22, and he carried a specific kind of light that seemed to soften the edges of their grief. He was naturally shy, a young man who preferred the quiet corners of a room to the center of attention. Yet his presence was felt in every thoughtful gesture and every sudden bright smile that broke through his reserved nature. To his father, Spencer was a reminder of the kindness that still existed in the world. A son who didn't need to say much to make his love known. He was the one who brought a sense of hope back into the house, his gentle spirit acting as a bridge between the painful past they were leaving behind and the uncertain future they were trying to build together. He had a way of noticing the small things, like when his father needed a cup of tea, or when his brother needed a moment of distraction, and he provided those comforts without ever being asked. His thoughtfulness serving as the invisible glue that held their fractured world together. His older brother saw him not just as a sibling, but as a best friend and a confidant, a steady presence in a life that had recently been turned upside down. They shared the kind of bond that only brothers who have walked through fire together can truly understand. A relationship built on years of shared secrets and the quiet support they offered each other when the weight of their mother's absence felt too heavy to bear. Spencer was the person his brother could always turn to, the one who listened without judgment and offered a smile that could make the darkest days feel a little more manageable. In that house in Horwich, among the memories of the woman they had lost, Spencer was the heartbeat that kept the family's spirit alive. A safe harbor in a world that had already taken so much from them. Their relationship was one of mutual reliance, where the older brother provided a shield of experience, while the younger brother provided a mirror of pure, uncomplicated goodness. As the winter air grew colder and the nights longer, the three men leaned into the routine they had built, finding a fragile peace in the simple fact of their togetherness. The father took solace in the sound of his son's voices in the hallway, a reminder that despite the devastating loss they had suffered, the essence of their family remained intact. They were learning to live around the hole in their lives, much like a tree grows around a scar. And Spencer was the one who seemed to lead the way with his quiet resilience. He didn't complain about the unfairness of their situation. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, both literally and figuratively. He found peace in the maintenance of his bike and the discipline of being a safe rider, perhaps finding in the mechanics of the machine a sense of control that life had briefly denied him. Within the walls of their home, the air was thick with a melancholy that was not bitter, but rather a soft, protective layer that bound them closer together. A family defined by a quiet strength that they hoped would see them through the darkest months of the year. This strength was not loud or boastful, but was found in the way they looked out for one another in the smallest of ways. It was in the way the father would linger by the door when Spencer left, or the way the brothers would check in on each other with a quick text during the day. They had become acutely aware of how quickly a life could change, and that awareness had made every moment spent together feel more precious, more deliberate. Spencer, with his shy nature and his constant smile, was the embodiment of that preciousness. He was the youngest, the one they all subconsciously felt the need to protect, the one whose future was supposed to be the brightest light at the end of their long tunnel of grief. The house in Horwich was more than just a building. It was a fortress of love and memory, a place where three men were slowly healing, unaware that the peace they had worked so hard to cultivate was about to be shattered by a shadow moving through the December night. The kitchen clock ticked toward the hour of 7 on that Saturday evening. It was a quiet moment, unremarkable in its routine, yet it would later become the most significant milestone in a father's memory. Spencer stood in the narrow hallway, the yellow light of the overhead bulb reflecting off the dark fabric of his heavy winter riding jacket. He was preparing for a short journey, moving with the practiced ease of someone who respected his machine and the cold air it would soon cut through. His father watched him, leaning against the doorframe of the living room. There was a sense of quiet pride in the way Spencer handled himself, a young man who had grown into a pillar of strength for the family during their recent months of shared sorrow. They stepped toward each other for a final embrace, a hug that carried the weight of everything they had lost and everything they still had to protect. The coat felt thick and cold under the father's hands, a protective shell that he hoped would keep the world at bay for just a few hours more. "I love you," the father said, his voice steady and warm in the small space of the hall. "Stay safe." These were the words they always used, a verbal ritual that acted as a shield. Spencer looked back at him, offering that familiar shy smile that had always been the brightest thing in the house. He promised he would be careful, his eyes reflecting a quiet confidence that came from years of disciplined riding and a genuine love for the road. The sound of the front door closing was a heavy, final thud that echoed briefly through the house. Outside, the motorbike sparked to life, its engine a low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the floorboards for a few seconds before fading away. The father watched from the window as the small red glow of the taillight grew smaller, eventually vanishing into the shadows of the neighborhood. He returned to his chair in the living room, the silence of the house settling around him like a heavy blanket. The television hummed quietly in the corner, providing a backdrop of mundane noise to an evening that felt entirely safe. There was no sense of dread, no sudden chill of intuition. There was only the peaceful expectation of a father waiting for his son to return. He imagined Spencer navigating the familiar curves of the Horwich streets, his hands steady on the grips, unaware that the world was moving toward a collision that no amount of caution could prevent. He simply sat in the quiet, counting the minutes until the sound of the engine would once again signal that his boy was home. The Skoda Fabia was a common sight on the roads of Greater Manchester, a practical vehicle designed for the routine commutes of everyday life. It was a white hatchback, unremarkable in its silhouette against the backdrop of the evening. On this Saturday, however, the vehicle was tracing a path that defied the logic of the road. Inside sat Cormac Sale, a young man of 22, whose evening had taken a turn into a blurred chemical landscape as he navigated the streets of Bolton. As he moved through the residential blocks, the car became less of a tool for transport and more of a drifting shadow, its movements recorded by the unblinking eyes of CCTV cameras perched above the intersections. To an outside observer, the vehicle appeared to be searching for a lane it could not find, weaving with a slow, rhythmic uncertainty that caught the attention of other drivers. Witnesses would later recount how the Skoda moved through the damp December air, its headlights cutting through the mist in a way that seemed disconnected from any clear intent. It was seen drifting toward the center line, then pulling back, then drifting again, a silent warning to those who passed it. The police investigation would eventually piece together these fragments of movement, mapping the car's progress across the borough like a series of erratic pulses on a monitor. There was no speed or aggression in the traditional sense, just a steady, mindless progression toward Chorley Old Road. How does a mind so disconnected from its surroundings continue to navigate the complex geometry of a modern town? This detachment was not a matter of fatigue or a mechanical fault in the Skoda's steering. It was the result of a profound chemical shift within the driver's mind. At the time of the collision, Cormac Sale was navigating the world through a heavy haze of ketamine. In a clinical setting, ketamine is a substance that serves a vital purpose as a dissociative anesthetic. In a hospital, it is used to disconnect a patient from pain, creating a state where the mind is present, but the body is elsewhere. It is a drug of distance, designed to quiet the nervous system and induce a trance-like stillness. But on the road, that distance becomes a void. The legal limit for such a substance is set at a point that accounts for trace amounts, but the toxicology reports would later reveal a much heavier truth. Sale was operating his vehicle while nearly 10 times over that legal limit. At such concentrations, the brain begins to lose its grip on the physical world. The edges of the road soften, reaction times stretch into seconds, and the very concept of a lane begins to lose its meaning. It is a state of profound detachment, where the driver is no longer a participant in the shared responsibility of safety, but a passenger in a machine that is moving of its own accord. There is an unsettling stillness in the thought of a vehicle moving through a quiet town, while the person behind the wheel is mentally miles away. It is a quiet realization of how fragile our boundaries truly are. We rely on the unspoken agreement that everyone on the road is seeing the same lines, the same lights, and the same horizon. When that agreement is broken by a mindless choice, the stillness of the night takes on a different quality. It becomes a heavy, expectant silence, a shadow moving through the mist toward a destination that no one intended to reach. The mapping of the Skoda's journey provided a clinical record of a mind losing its tether to reality. Investigators from the Serious Collision Investigation Unit would spend hours meticulously reviewing the digital breadcrumbs left behind by the vehicle. Each frame of footage told a story of a car that was increasingly failing to adhere to the order of the street. In one segment of video, the Fabia could be seen navigating a roundabout with a wide, sweeping arc that suggested a loss of spatial awareness. In another, it lingered too long at a junction, the brake lights glowing red against the wet asphalt before the car lurched forward once more. These were the movements of a driver trapped in a dissociative loop, where the rhythm of the city had become an unrecognizable pattern of lights and shadows. Other motorists who encountered the Skoda that evening felt an instinctive need to create distance. They described a vehicle that seemed to occupy more space than its physical dimensions allowed, its path unpredictable, and its speed inconsistent. One driver noted how the Skoda's tires frequently kissed the white lines of the central reservation, a gentle but persistent violation of the road's order. There was no honking of horns or flashing of lights from the Skoda. It moved with a ghostly indifference to the surrounding traffic. It was as if the car were moving through a different version of Horwich, one where the rules of physics and the requirements of law had been muffled by a thick, invisible curtain. Ketamine's role in this tragedy must be understood through a clinical lens to grasp the depth of the impairment. When used by medical professionals, it is a tool of mercy, allowing for procedures to take place without the trauma of conscious awareness. It targets specific receptors in the brain, effectively cutting off the communication between the conscious mind and the sensory input of the body. This creates what is often described as a dissociative state, a feeling of being a detached observer of one's own existence. In high doses, this progresses into what is known as a dissociative void, where the external world ceases to have any tangible weight or consequence. For Cormac Sale, being 10 times over the legal limit meant that the sensory inputs required for driving, the feel of the steering wheel, the distance to the curb, the approach of an oncoming light, were likely being processed as abstract concepts rather than immediate realities. Hallucinations are not uncommon at such levels, where the brain, deprived of accurate sensory data, begins to fill in the gaps with its own distorted imagery. The road ahead may have appeared to stretch or compress, and the headlights of a motorcycle might have seemed like a distant, harmless glow rather than a vehicle approaching in the opposite lane. This is the unsettling stillness of the event. The realization that danger does not always arrive with a roar or a screech of tires. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a quiet hatchback, moving at a moderate speed, driven by someone who is simply not there. The Skoda was a physical presence on Chorley Old Road, but the consciousness required to guide it safely had been surrendered to a chemical detachment. As the car crossed over into the opposite lane, it did so without the sudden jerk of a steering wheel or the panic of a corrected mistake. It was a slow, steady drift into the path of a young man who was doing everything right. A silent transgression of the boundaries that keep a community whole. The mist continued to cling to the hills of the West Pennine Moors, and the street lights of Horwich remained steady, unaware that the shadow in the Skoda was about to change the lives of a family forever. Chorley Old Road stretches through the heart of Horwich, a familiar ribbon of asphalt that connects the quiet residential pockets to the wider world of Bolton. At 9:40 in the evening, the road usually carries the gentle weight of people returning home, the hum of tires on damp pavement, providing a steady, predictable soundtrack to the neighborhood. The streetlights cast long, overlapping pools of amber onto the ground, reflecting off the moisture that had settled during the afternoon mist. It was a scene of domestic stillness, where the houses sat close to the curb, their curtains drawn tight against the December chill. The road follows a gentle, sweeping curve near the site, a transition that requires a simple, intuitive adjustment of the steering wheel for any focused driver. The Skoda Fabia continued its erratic journey, moving with a heavy, uncoordinated momentum that ignored the painted white lines of the carriageway. It crossed the center of the road, entering the lane reserved for oncoming traffic, without any sudden jerk of the wheel or screech of brakes. Spencer was exactly where he was supposed to be, riding his motorbike with the same care and precision he applied to every aspect of his life. The meeting of the two vehicles was not an explosion of sound, but a sudden, absolute cessation of forward motion. Kinetic energy was transferred in a singular, devastating instant. And then, the world on Chorley Old Road became very, very still. The motorbike came to rest, its engine silenced, while the Skoda halted in a position that defied the logic of the road. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant rhythmic pulse of emergency sirens drawing closer from the center of town. When the Greater Manchester Police arrived, the amber glow of the streetlights was joined by the frantic, revolving flicker of blue. These lights danced across the wet brickwork of the nearby houses and turned the damp pavement into a shimmering mosaic of sapphire and shadow. Officers moved through the cool air with a quiet, practiced urgency, their footsteps soft against the road. There were no shouts, only the low murmur of radios and the clinical assessment of the scene. It was there, amidst the flickering blue light and the damp December air, that the reality was confirmed. Spencer Rothwell-Poole, a son and a brother who had done everything by the book, had reached the end of his journey on this quiet stretch of road. The night remained cold, the mist still clinging to the edges of the town, as the weight of the moment settled into the very earth of Horwich. Within the sterile confines of the laboratory, the investigation shifted from the wet pavement of Chorley Old Road to the silent precision of chemical analysis. It was here that the true nature of the evening began to crystallize. Scientists processed the samples taken from Cormac Sale, searching for the reason behind the erratic path of the Skoda Fabia. The results revealed a level of ketamine that was staggering in its implications, showing that the driver was operating the vehicle while nearly 10 times over the legal limit for the dissociative substance. The police did not stop with the toxicology. They looked back through time, gathering the digital footprints left behind on CCTV cameras throughout Horwich and the surrounding borough of Bolton. Each frame of grainy footage was a piece of a larger, unsettling puzzle. They saw the car moving through the evening hours, its behavior noted by other motorists who felt a flicker of unease as they passed it. These witnesses would later provide statements describing a vehicle that seemed untethered from the rules of the road, drifting across lanes long before the final collision occurred. This collection of evidence removed the possibility of a simple mechanical failure or a momentary lapse in judgment. The legal definition of dangerous driving is clear, focusing on a standard of operation that falls far below what is expected of a competent and careful driver. When combined with such a high level of impairment, the collision ceased to be viewed as a mere tragedy of chance. It became a documented sequence of choices. There is a certain cold comfort in the way the justice system begins to move in these moments. The meticulous gathering of timestamps, the calibration of lab equipment, and the careful interviewing of witnesses all serve a singular purpose. They create a record of the truth that cannot be undone. As the file grew thicker, the chaos of the crash site was replaced by the orderly progression of a criminal case, ensuring that every detail was accounted for and every second of that night was understood. The facts were now set in stone, waiting for the doors of the court to open. February 26, 2025, arrived with the kind of heavy, still mourning that often accompanies moments of great consequence. Bolton Crown Court stands as a place of quiet gravity, where the high ceilings and polished wood paneling seem to absorb the echoes of the stories told within its walls. There is a specific weight to the air in a courtroom, a sense that the frantic energy of the outside world has been filtered out, leaving only the cold, hard search for accountability. As the family took their seats, the hushed whispers of the gallery were the only sound in a room that felt suspended in time. On this day, the proceedings moved with a somber efficiency. Cormac Sale stood before the court and entered a plea of guilty to the charge of causing death by dangerous driving. In the legal world, a guilty plea is a functional necessity, a step that avoids the long, agonizing months of a full trial where every traumatic detail would be picked apart by counsel. For the family of Spencer Rothwell-Poole, this plea provided a small mercy, sparing them from having to relive the night of December 14th through weeks of grueling testimony and cross-examination. Yet, as the words were spoken and the admission of guilt was recorded, they did little to fill the silence in the room or the void left in their lives. The judge listened to the evidence that had been so meticulously gathered by the Greater Manchester Police. The record was clear. The toxicology reports showing the staggering levels of ketamine, the CCTV footage of the erratic driving, and the undeniable fact that Spencer had been a safe and careful rider. The law, in its finality, offered its response. Cormac Sale was sentenced to 10 years and 8 months in prison. To further ensure the safety of the public, he was also handed a driving ban spanning 12 years. It was a sentence meant to reflect the severity of a choice that could never be taken back. A decade of life traded for a life lost. There is a certain kind of peace that comes with the closing of a legal file. It is not the peace of healing, but the peace of order. The scales of justice, which had been tipped so violently on that Saturday night in Horwich, had finally come to a rest. As the court adjourned and the heavy doors were closed, the legal chapter of this tragedy reached its conclusion. The facts had been heard, the sentence had been passed, and a safe container had been built around the truth. This resolution allowed the family to step away from the clinical world of evidence and begin the long, quiet work of simply remembering the boy they loved. Words carry a specific weight when they are born from a place of deep, unmoving sorrow. They anchor our grief to the physical world, turning an internal ache into something that others can finally see and feel. In the hushed gallery of the Bolton Crown Court, a father's voice became the only sound that mattered, rising above the rustle of papers and the low hum of the city outside. It was a moment where the legal definitions of dangerous driving and toxicology reports fell away, replaced by the raw, unvarnished truth of a life that had been woven into the very fabric of a home. Spencer's father spoke with a quiet dignity that resonated through the wood-paneled room. He looked toward the bench and explained that Cormac Sale didn't just kill his son that night on Chorley Old Road. He killed the family. It was a statement that stripped away the clinical nature of the proceedings, reminding everyone present that a household is a delicate ecosystem. When you remove the youngest light, the remaining members are left to navigate a darkness that feels permanent. The father's testimony was a map of that darkness, tracing the contours of a life that had been fundamentally altered by a single mindless decision. The house in Horwich, once filled with the rhythmic sounds of 3 men navigating their shared lives, had become a place of profound silence. The father described the empty chair at the table and the crushing weight of the void left behind by his youngest son. This was a man who had already walked through the valley of shadow, having lost his wife only months before Spencer was taken. Now, the quiet of the hallways felt like a physical presence, a constant reminder of the final hug at 7 p.m. that was supposed to be just another routine goodbye. He spoke of his struggle to find a path toward forgiveness, admitting that the precious, loving nature of the son he lost made the act of moving on feel almost impossible. Spencer's older brother also found the strength to share his heart with the court. He spoke of a bond that went beyond the typical rivalry of siblings, describing Spencer as his confidant and his anchor. To him, Spencer was his best friend, the person he could turn to when the world felt too heavy to carry alone. He spoke of the physical pain that hits him every single day, a sharp ache born from the knowledge that his brother will never reach his full potential. The milestones they were supposed to share, the birthdays, the career successes, the simple Saturday afternoons, had been erased by a stranger's choice. There is a specific kind of cruelty in knowing that Spencer was an amazingly safe and careful rider. He was a young man who did everything by the book, respecting the road and the machine he loved with the meticulous dedication. The brother's testimony highlighted this contrast, showing that no amount of caution can fully protect a gentle soul from the recklessness of the world. As these words settled into the official record, they served as a lasting testament to a young man who was loved with an intensity that transcended the tragedy of his end. The testimony was not just about the death of a motorcyclist, but about the enduring, aching love of a family trying to find their way back to the light. Spencer lived his life with a quiet, meticulous respect for the rules of the road. His brother's words echoed this truth. He was an amazingly safe and careful motorbike rider who did everything by the book. He understood the weight of the machine and the fragility of the human frame. He wore the gear, he checked the lights, and he respected the boundaries that keep us all moving together safely. It is a cruel irony that such a disciplined life was ended by a single night of total lawlessness. The Skoda Fabia represented everything Spencer was not: erratic, chemically altered, and drifting into spaces where it did not belong. In the wake of such a heavy silence, the community of Horwich began to find its own way to speak. A GoFundMe fundraiser was established. It was not merely to cover the costs of a life cut short. It served as a digital memorial for a young man who had left a void in so many hearts. The donations flowed in from neighbors, fellow riders, and strangers who had been moved by the story of the father and his two sons. Each contribution was a quiet acknowledgement of the family's double grief. This loss came so soon after the passing of Spencer's mother. The funds became a tangible symbol of support, a way for a town to wrap its arms around a father who had given his boy one last hug at 7 p.m. This story leaves us with a gentle but persistent thought to carry into the night. We often think of safety as a personal choice. It is a set of actions we take to protect ourselves. But Spencer's legacy suggests that safety is actually a collective promise we make to one another. When we step out the door, we carry the lives of everyone we pass in our hands. To stay safe is to honor the father waiting at home. It is to protect the brother who is also a best friend. We honor the quiet young man with a constant smile. As the rain continues to fall on Chorley Old Road, we are reminded that our responsibility to each other is the most sacred thing we own.